In the sun-bitten stillness of mid-morning, two small girls stood barefoot on the warped planks of a makeshift auction stage, their shadows falling long and thin across the dust. The older one, barely 5, held her sister's hand tight enough to turn their knuckles white. Her dress was too short, hem fraying above bruised knees, and her lip trembled only when no one was looking. Around them, men muttered, women clucked their tongues, and the auctioneer, her late mother's brother-in-law, cleared his throat like he was selling a sack of oats. No father, no dowry, no use, he barked, started the bid at $2 for the pair. Look at the hair on him. Soft as rabbit down. Junie Ray didn't know what a dowry was. But she knew her papa had kissed her head just 7 days ago and said he'd bring back oranges from Galveston. She also knew her mama's last cry in the night hadn't brought a baby. It had brought silence, the kind that makes people stop talking when you walk by. The younger one, Meira, just 3, leaned against June's side, thumb tucked between her lips. She hadn't spoken since they'd buried Mama with a borrowed spade behind the barn. Now she stared at a beetle crawling over the edge of the platform as if it had somewhere better to go. A dry wind kicked dust across the girl's bare feet. No shade, no shoes, no mercy. Junie glanced up at the men, red-faced, booted, chewing tobacco and judgment. She spotted the preacher's wife among them, whispering behind her fan. 3 girls, 1 dead, she hissed. That womb was cursed. That's when Junie stepped forward. Her voice was small, but it carried. I can sweep and cook oats, and sew a little. I can help with cows if they don't kick. You can keep me if you let Mira go. I work forever. I swear. Gasps flew to it. A few chuckled. A boy no older than 10 snorted. The auctioneer smirked like it pleased him to see her try. Mira turned and looked up, not at the crowd, but at her sister, who was all she had left in the world. Then someone in the back moved. Not fast, not loud, just enough to make the boards creak under his weight. He stepped into the lad like it wasn't meant for him. Tall, sombre, and white at the shoulders, a man who looked like the earth made him just to carry burdens. Dust clung to his hat brim and coat hem, and a strip of sweat darkened the collar of his shirt. He said nothing, but the moment he appeared, the crowd changed. Folks got quiet. A few stepped back. Junior Ray had never seen him before, but she knew somehow he wasn't there for cattle. He walked closer, each step deliberate, measured. When he reached the front of the platform, he looked not at the auctioneer or the crowd, but at the girls, just them. The auctioneer straightened, clearing his throat again. That there's Beckett Kane. Guido man keeps to himself. I ain't they got no kin left. Beckett didn't flinch. He set down a small burlap pouch on the edge of the stage. It landed with a soft clink. More coins than most men in that crowd had seen in one go. All of it, the auctioneer muttered. 4 for both, Beckett nodded once. That was all. You can't just buy, the woman began. But no one stopped him as he stepped up beside the girls. He didn't offer sweet words or ask for their names. Instead, he crouched down, eyes level with Junie. They were pale, not cold, but distant, like he'd once lived too long with something hollow inside. He held out a calloused hand. Junie didn't take it at first. Her legs shook. Mira clanked tighter. Then, Beckett did something she didn't expect. He knelt lower, removed his hat, and offered Mira the tiniest of smiles. It looked foreign on his face, like he hadn't used it in years. Mira blinked, stepped forward, and slipped her hand into his without a word. That was when Junie moved slowly like the wind might punish her for hope. They climbed down from the platform together, Beckett lifting Mira onto his hip and walking with Junie beside him through a sea of stares and sharp whispers. Ranches gone soft, someone spat buying trouble. You give him back come winter. Beckett ignored it all. He walked steady, jaw locked, eyes on the road ahead. Junie kept glancing back, half expecting someone to call them back, say it was a mistake. But no one did. Only once, when they passed the preacher's wife again, did Junie hear something that made her jaw tighten. Only thing more useless than a barren woman is her girdles. That's when Junie let go of Beckett's coat and picked up a small stone from the road. She didn't throw it, just held it, a memory, something solid in her palm. As the town faded behind them, Beckett paused at a watering trough outside the smithy. He set Mira down, cooped water for her with his hands, then for Junie. Then, without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out a red handkerchief. He tied it around June's wrist, snug and careful. She stared at it like it meant something more than cloth. He touched his hat brim, lifted Mira again, and started walking. Junie followed, but as she did, she whispered to no one in particular. He didn't ask for our names. And behind them, unseen by either crowd, the beetle finally tumbled off the edge of the auction stage and disappeared into the dirt. Junior Ray had never walked a road so quiet that it screamed. The town had watched them leave like they were thieves instead of children, like they'd stolen pity from folks who were too proud to offer it. Dust lifted around their ankles as Becca Kane led them through the crooked streets. Mira asleep against a shoulder, Junie trailing just behind with the red kerchief loose on her wrist like a promise she didn't ask for. She didn't cry. Not even when the general storekeeper turned his sign to closed as they passed. Not even when old Mrs. Farley whispered to her friend that widow will regret talking in dead weight. Sure as Sunday. Junie had heard words like that before. When Mama got sick, when the baby didn't cry, when the in-laws said girls weren't worth the grave dirt. Still, she kept pace with Beckett's long even strides. Even if her legs were smaller and her shoes were nothing but skin, they passed the old blacksmith shop where the iron smelled like thunder and sweat. Beckett didn't glance in, but Junie saw the smith nod once at him, respectful, or maybe just resigned. The only real sound was the creak of saddle leather from Beckett's belt and the faint rhythm of Myra's sleeping breath against his neck. The church loomed ahead, tall and whitewashed, with its bell rope swaying wind. Children played on the steps, marbles clinking. One little boy pointed at Junie and said, "That's the girl whose mama died, 'cause she made too many girls." The others laughed like it was a riddle they all understood. Junie looked down, but her cheeks didn't flush. She just reached up and tied the red kerchief tighter. Beckett paused just briefly outside the iron gate of the churchyard. He didn't bow his head or cross himself. Just stared up at the steeple like it owed him something. Then he shifted Mira higher and kept walking, never breaking stride. Junie didn't speak, but she watched him. Watched how his hands worked, firm, not rough. Watched how his jaw was always set, as though it had forgotten how to rest. She didn't know why he'd taken them. Maybe he felt sorry. Maybe he'd lost something, though. Or maybe he just didn't like the way folks looked at girls like her, like leftover bread gone moldy. Soon the town fell behind, and the road widened, lined with cottonwoods that whispered without wind. The sun turned softer here, more gold than white, and June's feet didn't sting so much in the shade. Beckett stopped at a shallow creek. He knelt to wet his handkerchief and wiped the dust from Myra's cheeks. Then he handed it to Junie without a word. She scrubbed her own face slowly, careful not to drop it. When she looked up, Beckett was watching her, not staring, just noticing. She blinked, unsure if she was supposed to smile. He didn't. So neither did she. They walked again. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried. Myra stirred but didn't wake. Junie looked up at the sky, cloudless and wide, and wondered if her father could see the same sky wherever he was. She tried to remember the shape of his voice when he laughed. After what felt like an hour, they reached a sloped stretch of land guarded by a split-rail fence. The cabin wasn't much, just wood and nail and time, but smoke rose from the chimney, and laundry fluttered on the line, pinned with care. It didn't smell like sorrow. June's steps slowed. Beckett opened the gate and walked through. She hesitated. This was his place, not hers. The road she'd come from still stained her feet, but he didn't tell her to come or to stay. He just looked back once, waiting. She followed. Inside the cabin was worn but tidy. The air smelled of pine soap and cedar bark. A kettle hissed softly on the stove. There were 2 chairs at the table, a lantern by either door, and a pair of little boots, well used, sat neatly on the hearth. Beckett laid Myra gently on a cot and covered her with a faded quilt. Then he turned to the cupboard and pulled out 2 tin cups. Pouring water from a clay jug. He handed one to Junie. She drank like her throat was cracking. He drank slower. Silence sat between them like an extra guest. Beckett reached for a small box on the shelf, took out a roll of cloth and salve, and gestured to her feet. She froze, unsure, then sat. He knelt before her and cleaned the blood and dirt from her soles, wrapping them in slow, practiced movements. Junie watched his hands and only his hands because looking at his face might make something fall apart inside her chest. When he finished, he rose and returned the salve to the shelf. Still not a word, just the sound of Mara's breathing, the hiss of the kettle, and the low rustle of leaves outside. Junie stood and walked to the window. From here, she could see all the way down the slope to the road. She could still feel the stairs, still hear the laughter. I don't want her to hear those things, she said, not turning around. What they said, what they'll keep saying behind her. Beckett didn't move. But the silence shifted, it softened. People think if a woman don't make boys, she's broken, she added. But Mama said we were her wildflowers. That we grew in the places men didn't look. A chair scraped softly. Beckett sat. She ain't ever going to grow right if they keep stepping on her. Junie whispered. Beckett reached over and placed something on the table. A wooden carving. A little horse with one ear chipped. He pushed it toward her. For her? She asked. He nodded. She picked it up gently, rubbing her thumb along the grain. You ain't going to send us back, are you? He didn't answer, but he didn't take the carving away either. Outside, the wind picked up for the first time, rustling through the cottonwoods. It wasn't loud, but it carried a sound that Junie hadn't heard in days. Oh, just a whisper of it. Then a knock came at the door. 3 hard raps. Junie flinched. Beckett stood slowly, reaching for the rifle hanging on the wall. He didn't load it, just held it like a man not aiming to shoot, but to say, don't come closer. Junie stepped beside Myra's cot and wrapped her arms around the little girl. The door creaked open. A shadow fell across the floorboards and a voice, familiar, drawling, dangerous, spoke from the threshold. Well, I'll be damned. So this is where the cane man hit him. Hume's breath hitched. The red kerchief slipped from her wrist and hit the floor. The man in the doorway wasn't low, but he carried the kind of arrogance that made him act like it. He sat low, mustache waxed, silver belt buckle too shiny for the dust of real work. Beckett didn't raise the rifle, just let it rest against his hip like a reminder. A silent steady wait. Come for the girls, the man drawled, stepping one boot across the threshold. Names or intrigue. Their mama was my wife's cousin. Family blood. We got claim. Junie didn't move from Myra's side. She kept her palm flat on the little girl's chest, feeling it rise and fall under the quilt. Slow as she knew better than to speak when men like that came in with boots clean and eyes full of transactions. You got no writ, Beckett said at last, voice low as a winter creek. And no business. Orion's smile flicked sharp. Serif's riding up this week. Said best I get them settled. Girl's worth something while she's still young. You understand? Beckett's hand tightened on the rifle. Ius tonse. Says not for sale. Orion shrugged. Didn't they seem like you bought him to keep quiet? Folks say you're trying to build yourself a family with bastards and orphans. Junie looked up at Beckett. He didn't, but something shifted in his jaw. Something tired and hard as bone. She's sleeping, Beckett said, nodding toward Mira. Best you go before you wake her. Orion tipped his hat, sneering. We'll be back, paper in hand. Then he left just like that. No bullets, no fists, just a promise left behind like a splinter in the door frame. Beckett didn't speak for a long time after. He stood there staring where Oren had been until the wind picked up through the trees and June's voice broke the hush. What did he mean about Mira? Beckett turned slow and deliberate. He didn't explain. Just walked to the stove, added a piece of split wood, and struck a match. Fide sparked back to laugh. The kettle began its softness again, and Junie realized she was shaking. It took a tin bowl down from the shelf and ladled stew into it. Then another, then a third smaller. He set them on the table, not saying whose was whose. But when Junie sat down, the biggest was in front of her and the smallest near Myra's cot. Beckett picked up his spoon and began to eat. Quiet. Junie stirred hers, not sure if she was hungry or afraid. The stew smelled like something kind. Root vegetables, garlic, and something smoky. It didn't smell like pity. She took one bite, then another, and only then did she realize her eyes were wet. She wiped them fast. Beckett didn't look up, didn't ask. After supper, he fetched a bundle of dried lavender from a shelf and laid it beside Myra's pillow. "Helps with breathing," he said simply. Junie tilted her head. "You grow flowers?" "Used that one," he replied. Wife used to like the smell. That was the most he'd said in 2 days. Outside, dusk came in slow, painting the trees in burnt gold. Beckett rose and opened the front door, letting in the hush of the evening. He pulled a chair out onto the porch and returned with a small whittling knife and block of cedar. No words, just hands carving something soft from something hard. Junie stepped out after a while, bare feet brushing the porch planks, still tender, but bandaged. She stood near him, silent. "What are you making?" she asked. "Not sure yet." She nodded like she understood. Sometimes you didn't know what something was till it was finished. He handed her the knife. She blinked. "It's sharp," he said. "But you can learn." She looked at it. It smelled silver like trust. They sat together, her legs swinging, his boots steady as twilight rolled over them. Myra's giggle floated out from the window just once, then silence again. "You always live alone?" Junie asked. He didn't answer right away. Then since the ground stopped giving back, she didn't ask what that meant. She just nodded like an old soul in a small body, already knowing there were some kinds of pain people didn't put into words. That night, he laid out a second quilt near the hearth, fluffed a pillow, and pointed, "Warmest spot." Junie looked toward Myra, who now slept curled around the wooden horse Beckett had carved. She hesitated. "Can I sleep next to her?" Beckett didn't speak. He just carried Myra's quilt to the hearth, laid it beside the one he'd made for Junie, and went to get the little girl. When he brought her over, still half asleep, he laid her down gently and left Junie to curl in beside her. "Night," Junie whispered, pulling the quilt to Mira's chin. Beckett paused in the doorway to his room. "You still got that stone?" Junie blinked. "What stone?" "From the road. Day we left the auction." Junie reached into her dress pocket, pulled out the small flat stone she'd carried since that walk. She didn't know why she hadn't dropped it. "Keep it," he said. "You'll know when to throw it." Then he shut the door behind him, leaving Junie in the glow of the dying fire, her sister's soft breath at her back, and a stone in her hand that suddenly felt a little lighter. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like someone whispering secrets too old to say aloud. Somewhere far down the road, a man like Oren Trigg was sharpening words into weapons. But in here, for the first time, the cabin didn't ask anything from her. Not to be useful, not to be polite, just to be. The fire cracked once. Junie stared at the ceiling, eyes stinging but dry. And somewhere in the dark, Beckett picked up the photo tucked into the back of his shelf, the one with a woman smiling and the boy with eyes like Junie's, and set it face down, not to forget, just to begin again. The knock came just after breakfast. 3 steady raps that didn't ask permission. Junie Ray dropped the tin cup she'd been rinsing in the basin. Water splashing her bare toes. "Mera froze mi vite." Spoon paused inches from her mouth. The warmth that had built over the last few days, the fire, the whittling, the quiet safety, evaporated into a stillness that felt too tight to breathe in. Beckett didn't rush. He stood from the table, wiped his hands on a cloth, and lifted the rifle from its hook with a motion too quiet to be called threatening. He didn't load it. Didn't they need to? When he opened the door, sunlight poured in behind the visitor, casting his shadow long across the cabin floor. Sheriff Braden Co., Leon, starched, and all paperwork taped his head with 2 fingers. Morn Kane Beckett stepped aside without a word. The sheriff's boots echoed as he entered, each step too clean for the dust he was walking through. His gaze slid over the room. Myra's wooden horse. Hume's carved spoon on the windowsill. The second quilt folded by the hearth. He took it in like he was adding up numbers, not people. "Got the letter here from Judge Morrow down in Dry Bend," Co said, tapping a folded paper against his palm. "Seems there's question over who these girls rightly belong to." "They ain't a shipment," Beckett replied, voice dry as old timber. "No, go sad. Bad folks are treating him like one. A turned toward Junie. Jew their blood. Junie stood straighter. I'm their sister. That's not what I asked. Beckett's voice cut in before she had to answer again. Their father's gone south for trade. He left him in town with folk who sold him like cattle. He bought what they tried to throw away. Sheriff Co. Dignte blink. Orin Triggs filed claim. Said him. Says their kin by marriage got signatures from the girl's grandparents and that holds weight around here. Hun's fingers curled into fists. She'd seen those signatures before on the paper that let them bury Mama in the edge of the pasture with no stone, no sermon, just a shovel and a whisper. Mira, don't even talk around him, Junie said, stepping forward. She shakes like a pup that's been kicked too much. Makes no difference in court, child, Co replied almost kindly. Truth don't always sway the law. Beckett leaned his weight on the rifle, eyes steady. What do you want? Hoop him moros holden. A hearing this Friday, the sheriff said. Down by the churchyard. Anyone with a claim can speak. A turned to Junie again. That includes you, little miss. Then softer than before. Bring here. Let folks see her with you. As Co stepped back outside, he paused, adjusting his hat. He don't much like talking kids from homes that don't smell of rot or liquor. But paper talks loud these days. Do you want to talk louder? Beckett shut the door without saying goodbye.